Now that you have a grasp on why a primary source or a secondary source can be reliable, let's take a look at the specific reliability questions on an IGCSE paper 2. The paper we are analyzing, the October November session 2013, presents questions 3 and 4 as questions that propose you to discuss the reliability of sources. Question 3 says, how surprised are you by source D? Explain your answer using details from the source and your knowledge. Question 4 says, how far does source F prove that Westmoreland was wrong in source E? Explain your answer using details of the sources and your knowledge. The key tips you need to consider then for answering these type of questions is the following. Regarding the sources, you will need to identify similarities and differences considering the content. This is, you have to consider the information each source provides on the events. But also, considering the source, you will have to take into account the origin and purpose of each source. That is, the who, the when, the where, and for what reasons each source was produced. But besides this, to understand properly the sources and their reliability, you will have to also consider your own knowledge. Because in order to identify the origin and purpose of the sources, you will not only have to consider your own knowledge of the period being analyzed, for example, in this case, what you know about the Vietnam War, but also you will have to consider your knowledge about the type of sources that exists, primary, secondary, and the different types among primary sources. What? Are you a bit puzzled and you're thinking, what is this lady talking about? Yes, I know. Don't worry, let's go step by step. So, first of all, considering the content, let's take a look at the question about Westmoreland, thinking whether if he's lying or not. These are the sources. Source E is General Westmoreland speaking in his autobiography, published in 1976. And source F is from a book called The Tragedy Lessons of Vietnam by Robert McNamara, published in 1995. And it says that McNamara was the US Secretary of Defense and a leading member of the American government until 1968 when he resigned because of Vietnam. So the question about Westmoreland, whether if he's lying or not, if we consider the content, then what we need to do is try to identify differences and similarities between the two sources to decide whether if one of the sources is lying. If we take a look at the content, we can see that Westmoreland says that the war still could have been won and the North Vietnamese would have been broken. However, in source F, Robert McNamara is saying that our military strategy in Vietnam was deeply flawed, which means that these two sources are providing a different view about whether if the war could have been won or not. So in this case, considering the content, we could say that source F proves that source E is lying because source F states that the Vietnam strategy was flawed, and source E, Westmoreland, is saying that they had a strategy that could have made them win. However, also if we consider the content, we could say that Westmoreland is not lying, is in fact saying what he thought. And this is actually supported by what is said in source F. Source E says that to enable the military to carry out planned operations in Laos and Cambodia and north of the demilitarized zone, along with intensified bombing, the North Vietnamese would have been broken. Westmoreland is using the conditional form, would have been broken. And then in source F, McNamara says American military and civilian leaders assumed we could force the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese soldiers to fight it out on the battlefield. So, in this case, the information provided in both sources is talking about an assumption that both persons are saying about what happened in Vietnam and the strategy that the USA had in Vietnam.